Fantastic. All right. So do you have any question from yesterday's class? Okay. If not, let's just begin. So there are a few different topics we are going to cover today in magnetism. Okay. Uh, so let us start with something very important, what we call as magnetic domain. Okay. So magnetic domain essentially depends on the grain size, grain size of magnetic minerals. Okay. Now, generally, magnetic domains are subdivided into three categories. One we call as single domain. The second one is called multi-domain. And third is called pseudo-single domain. Okay. Now, uh, let us think of a magnetic grain which is extremely tiny in size. Okay, it's like less than less than a micron. Okay, very small magnetic grain which is less than a micron. Okay, so in that, what you will observe that in that whole grain. So this is this grain, and which I am now blowing up. Suppose it's a very small grain. You will find there is only one magnetic moment present. Okay? In a single in a single cell, we call we can call it as a magnetic cell. Within that magnetic cell, only one magnetic moment is present. Whereas if you increase the grain size of the magnetic minerals, what you observe that within a single cell, okay, there are more than one magnetic moments present. So this is what we call a single domain grain, and this is what we call a multi-domain grain. Now, what is the significance of a single domain grain, and what is the significance of a multi-domain grain? So the single domain grain is absolutely stable. Okay, single domain grains are absolutely stable, very stable. It is as if this particular, I mean, physically, I mean, analogically, if you try to understand that, as if within this small cell, this one particular magnetic moment is kind of tightly packed. Okay, so it actually takes a very high external magnetic field. So if I want to actually, reorient this particular magnetic moment, what I have to do? I have to induce it under some external magnetic field, right? So I have to actually apply a very strong magnetic field to do any movement on this particular magnetic moment. So if a particular rock is kind of dominated by very tiny, less than a micron size uh, magnetic ferromagnetic grains in them, okay, that is what we call, it is a single domain dominated rock, and there you actually the magnetic moment is extremely stable. Okay, the magnetic moment is extremely stable, so it requires a lot of a lot of um, H, I mean external magnetic field strength, to actually rotate this particular magnetic moment. Okay. Whereas in case of multi-domain grain, this H is not that high. Okay. You will not require a lot of external magnetic field strength. It is easier for a multi-domain grain. It is actually easier to reorient them, because as if they are loosely packed. Okay, they are loosely packed. So we can very easily reorient a multi-domain grain. Okay, and pseudo single domain grain is somewhere in between. Okay, it's like it has perhaps more than one magnetic moments, but it's the strength that you will require will be somewhere in between. Okay, so that is what we call as a single domain grain, a pseudo single domain grain, which is somewhere in between multi-domain and single domain. Okay, so what I want you to think about, and I want an answer for you, answer from you next time. Let us say I am taking a rock. So there are two scenarios. Okay, in the first scenario, I am taking a rock. You can find the answer in book, but then before looking into books or in the internet, what I want you to do, I want you to think about it a little bit as well. Okay, so there are two rocks I am looking at. In one rock, this is single domain dominated. And this is multi-domain dominated. Okay. And in both of them, I am actually doing a hysteresis loop experiment. Okay. In both of them, I'm doing an hysteresis loop experiment. Okay, which we have explained in one or two classes before. Okay, and what are the basic parameters that we have said we actually measure? We measure MS, MRS, so magnetic saturation magnetization, remanent magnetization, okay, and then we measure something called HC, okay, and then we measure something called HCR. Yeah. I want you to think about, if I essentially make a plot of MS versus MRS, or you can actually plot the other way around maybe. Okay. MRS versus MS and HC versus HCR, or so and so forth. Yeah. Where would a single domain grain be plotted, and where would a multi-domain grain be plotted? Okay. Remember, what is HC? HC is the force. Yeah, HC is the magnetization that you will actually require to rotate your magnetic moments, right? So think that in these terms, and there is something called Day's plot. Okay, the clues is in Day's plot. Okay, you can find them out in the internet, but then before doing that, try to think about, if I have a single domain dominated grain, how would the shape of a hysteresis loop be differed from that of a multi-domain grain, a multi-domain dominated rock. Okay, try to think about it, because that if you do that exercise by yourself, there will be a lot of doubts cleared in your own mind. And then we will discuss this particular thing in the next class. Okay? Please give it a try. Okay, how the hysteresis experiment will vary between a single domain dominated rock from a multi-domain dominated rock. Okay, is the exercise clear for you? Is the exercise clear for you, everyone? Okay, so please give it a try. Please don't look into the books right. I mean, at the very beginning, then you will not be able to think it through. Try to think about it by yourself. You can discuss amongst yourselves and give me some answers in the next class, and then we will discuss it further. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is around induced primary and induced magnetization. Find out just a moment. Let us say the total magnetization of a rock is expressed by a vector. Yes, so this is the total magnetization. Okay, total magnetization. Let us call that as MT. That's the total magnetization of a rock is expressed by this vector. I can simply resolve this vector into two components. Okay, one we will call it as MR. That is what we call as MR. So MT is my total magnetization. MR we will call it as remanent magnetization. Remanent magnetization. And then there will be another component which we will call as MI, and MI is my induced magnetization. Okay? The remanent magnetization is also sometimes called as primary magnetization. So the theory is very simple, that when a particular rock forms, it may be through sedimentary process, it may be through igneous process, or it may be through metamorphic process. Whenever the rock actually forms, it acquires certain magnetization due to the prevalent magnetic field of that time. Okay, and that is what we call as remanent magnetization. That's the magnetization acquired by a rock during its formation. Okay? And then it stays there for a while, I mean for billions of years, and then you discover that rock today, and you measure its total magnetization, and that is what we call as MT. So the MT will have one component which is MR, which is its primary magnetization or the remanent magnetization, that is acquired by the rock during its formation. And then there will be another component of that MT, which is MI, which is the induced magnetization. So because after the formation of the rock has been exposed to the magnetic field, changing magnetic field of the Earth till today. So it has acquired some magnetization while it was there, you know, while it was lying there. Okay, so that is what we call as induced magnetization. The total, if we add these two vectors, then I get actually my MT, which is my present day total magnetization. Then I will give you two scenarios. Okay, so in one case, so scenario one case, so this is my MT, my total magnetization. MR, MI. Okay. So what you are observing by looking at the length of these different vectors, what you can see that the major component of the MT is dominated by MR. Okay, so the induced magnetization is not very dominant. Okay, so hence the vector length of the induced magnetization is relatively smaller than the MR. Okay, so in this particular case, you can virtually ignore MI. You can actually ignore MI and think that MT is kind of representative of MR. Okay. On the other hand, in scenario 2, I'm looking at another situation. So MT is this, and then MI is fairly large. And MR is relatively smaller. So you can see that the total magnetization is kind of dominated by the induced magnetization, and the remanent magnetization is actually small. Okay, so if I want to work with remanent magnetization, I have to demagnetize my sample so much so that I can actually get rid of these induced magnetization. Okay, so if I want to work with my remanent magnetization, then I have to actually get rid of the induced magnetization completely, because compared to MR, MI is actually fairly large. Okay. So this remanent magnetization is absolutely important for us. Is absolutely important for us for any sort of paleomagnetic studies, because that is the magnetization we are interested, because it relates to the formation of the rock. Okay. Now, let's just hold that thought about remanent magnetization for a moment. I just want you to I will come back to the remanent magnetizations in a moment. But before that, so magnetization is actually like gravity was measured by an instrument called gravimeter. Magnetization is actually measured by an instrument called magnetometer. It measures the magnetization. It measures MT, eventually the total magnetization. Okay, and there are few kinds of magnetometers, like for example the flux gate magnetometer, proton precision magnetometer, and then I have absorption cell magnetometer. There's a brief description given in Laudy's book. What are the working principles of these magnetometers? I don't want you to essentially get into the nitty-gritty of the instrument, but make sure that you read about the basic principles, the working principles of these three types of magnetometers. Yeah, it's fairly easy. You can read them out from Laudy's book. If you don't understand anything, you can let me know. But I'm sure you will be able to understand at least the working principle. We are actually interested in the working principle only. Okay. Now, compared to now, if we compare gravity survey with magnetic survey, for gravity survey, you remember what was our main aim? Our main aim was to find out gravity anomalies, right? And can just someone tell me what a gravity anomaly is? Someone please, let's see. Shayan Jyoti, can you just tell me what is a gravity anomaly? Shayan Jyoti.
So gravity anomaly, it is the difference between the acceleration of free fall which you see or the gravity on the planet's surface.
Difference between what and what?
So it is a difference between the acceleration of free fall or the gravity which we see on the planet's surface.
Yeah, I mean, what minus what is the anomaly?
Sir, I'm
That,
not sure about that.
come on, that was the whole, I mean, we discussed about it for, I don't know, more than a week. I mean, more than a week. And that is the basic principle of all the gravity surveys.
So it is the difference between actually the observed acceleration fall and the value which we predict by taking the model of the
Of the
planet's gravity.
international reference ellipsoid, right?
International, yes, sir.
Yeah, come on. So where was your? I mean, did you forget about it, or I was
No, sir,
completely scared with the answer that you
no,
gave.
sir, the reference about the
Yeah.
reference I just forgot.
So measured minus theoretical, and
The
the
yes,
theoretical
sir.
comes from the international reference ellipsoid, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you remember? Yeah. Don't scare me like that. Okay. So it's the difference between GM minus G theoretical and theoretical actually international reference ellipsoid, right? That is what we discussed. Now, similarly, for magnetic survey, we are also interested in magnetic anomalies. Right? We're also interested in magnetic anomalies. Okay? So we will need, so there will be a magnetic magnetization measured, and there will be a magnetization, theoretical, right? So magnetization measured, I will do it from my magnetometers. Okay, I'll just take my magnetometer and see how much magnetization is there on a piece of on a piece of land. So here is my line A to B. I have taken my magnetometers at equidistant point. I measured my magnetization, okay, and the magnetization looks something like this. So the magnetization is, there is a hump in between. And then, like we have international reference ellipsoid, similarly, with respect to magnetic processes, there is something called international geomagnetic reference field. Okay. So here, like we had IRE, similarly, we have here IGRF. IGRF stands for International Geomagnetic Reference Field. Okay. So that kind of imagines a like an uniform magnetic property of the oceanic crust and the continental crust, and they also have a magnetization value for each place. So that perhaps is this. So this is the magnetization MT at IGRF. Okay. So this then will be my magnetic anomaly, right? We'll discuss more about magnetic anomaly in a moment. But let's say how the magnetic surveys are done. I'm not spending more time about explaining why this is an anomaly, because you already know how anomalies are calculated in case of gravity. I have spent a lot of time about explaining why is it an anomaly. I hope it is clear for you. Okay, so what it means that this perhaps below this surface there is a material, right, which has, say, this is MT, okay, and MTE. Perhaps this is for the surrounding. It's the magnetization of the surroundings, and there is perhaps a ore body which is more magnetic than the rest. Hence, I am observing a magnetic anomaly at the top of it. And magnetic anomaly is found by differentiating the measured magnetization by my magnetometer minus the theoretical magnetization. And here the reference frame is International Geomagnetic Reference Field. Now, the magnetic surveys in most of the time, okay, so you can take a magnetometer, and then take a spot measurement. That is fine. So there could be a spot measurement. But in general, the normal practice is the magnetic surveys are done either by are most of the time on land. On land, they are airborne. Okay? They are airborne. So what do I mean by airborne? That there is perhaps a small Do you know what I have drawn now? Even I don't know what I have drawn. Give me some time. Let me draw an aeroplane. This is a person, this is the pilot, okay, who is flying the aeroplane. Okay, so the aeroplane is actually flown over an area, okay, and then there is a magnetometer which is kind of hanging. So this is the magnetometer, which is actually hanging from the aircraft. Okay, and this is sometimes called is a fish. Okay? That hangs from this small aeroplane, and it actually fly over a large area and keeps on getting continuous measurement of the magnetization. Okay, the same can be done if it is in the sea. The same can be achieved by a ship. Okay, there is a ship, and then that ship has also a tail in which a magnetometer is attached, and then the the ship actually moves around. Okay, and then takes the measurement of magnetization. So there could be some spot measurements. I mean, you can take the magnetometer at a single point and measure the magnetization. But the common practice is by airborne technique or in a ship if it is offshore. Okay. Sometimes you actually can attach two magnetometers at two different depths. Okay, so this is M1 and M2. Okay, two magnetometers. Okay, and you will see that closer the magnetometer, you get a you get a different signal. The magnetometer which is a little bit away from the surface, you get a different signal. By looking at the difference between the signals, you can also talk about the anomaly. But anyway, I'm not getting into the details, but this is how, in general, magnetic surveys are done. Okay, so how if I now look at an area, suppose this is the 2D area, the map area on which the magnetic survey is done. So the plane essentially flies like this. Okay, and then it will fly like this. So I have got magnetization values on all these points. Okay, continuous values on all these points everywhere. Okay, but these are the places where I don't have values, right? These are the places I don't have values because uh, my flight has not actually crossed those areas. So, and then what you do, I have values here and I don't have values here. You actually essentially interpolate to create, a magnetization map, which is nothing like but a contour map. Okay, so the different values of magnetizations are contoured. Okay, by interpolating where I don't have the data, but where I have the data is fair, good enough, and then I of course subtract it from a map, which is uh, empty at IGRF. And then if I subtract that, what I get is another contour map. Yeah. And that provides me my magnetic anomaly map. Okay. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear? I hope it is. By the way, I see the attendance is not very high. And, right now I am getting, after I finish a class, I get a spreadsheet with all who have been attending the classes and for how many minutes. Okay. So I have the record of the students who are not attending classes. So I just want I want you to take that in account, because attendance this time is a part of the grading system, right? You know about it. So make sure you convey that message to all your friends so that I have the record now who all are attending the classes. All right, next. That is done. Now let us say I have this is my ground surface. Okay, and in here I have a cylindrical magnetic body buried. Okay, I have a cylindrical magnetic body buried. Let us say at this point P, I have my magnetometer. Okay, so this point P with the kind of the midpoint of the magnetometer, if of the body, that point is A. This distance is small r, and let us say I am interested in the vertical component of the magnetization. Let us say that is delta Bz, and this angle is theta. Okay. Now, let's draw a cone. Let's draw a cone from point P around that cylinder. You can understand like a three-dimensional cone. And the solid angle, okay, the solid angle that this cone actually makes, let us call that sigma. Okay. Let's say, right. Now, what I will, if I want to just calculate the delta Bz on this sort of configuration, what I need to think of, that, you know, suppose I have my north pole of the north pole of this body is kind of here. It can be on the other side as well, okay? And then my south poles are kind of distributed here. Okay? Now let us say that the density of these poles. I mean, now I'm bringing the concept of monopole, although they don't exist. You remember we said that the monopoles do not exist, but still we bring in the concept of monopoles every now and then. So let us say the density of this monopole poles at the surface. Okay, and let us say the surface area is A. Area is A, and the density of the poles at the surface is, let us say, small sigma. Okay, then Bz will be directly proportional to sigma A. That means, you know, the density of the poles in surface multiplied by the area. That means the total pole strength into cos theta by r square. Okay, into cos theta by r square. Okay, r is the distance, because with distance, of course, the magnetization will decrease. Okay, and then I am, so this is this would have been if it is at the top, and then cos theta is because it is at an angle, right? Now then Bz is directly proportional. Now a cos theta by r square, a cos theta by r square, if you have read about the solid angle geometry, you will know that a cos theta by r square is nothing but the solid angle. Okay, and yeah, a cos theta by r square is nothing but the solid angle. So I can write down. So sigma, I can essentially say that's the magnetization, okay, multiplied by the solid angle. Okay. Now, this is an important information to note, and let's write down that one here. Dz is directly proportional delta m sigma, where this is the solid angle. Now, if I try to understand, so this is my surface, okay, and here is my cylindrical magnetic body, okay, and I am doing my measurement at point, I'm taking the magnetometer at point 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now you can see that delta m is nothing but, it implies to the sigma, right? So that is the density of the monopoles at the surface, right? Which is not changing. What is changing? The change is only in terms of the surface area, or sorry, the solid angle. Now let us say at point 1, if I take my magnetometer, I will see my solid angle is this. Say this is sigma 1 at point 2. So his solid angle is this one, sigma 2. At point 3, my solid angle is sigma 3. At point 4, my solid angle is 4. At point 5, my solid angle is sigma 5, right? So which one is the largest solid angle? Can you tell me? Which one is the largest solid angle? Sigma 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Within them, which is my largest solid angle? Can someone tell me?
Sigma 3.
Sigma 3, absolutely. So sigma 3 is my largest solid angle, and we said that Bz is directly proportional to the solid angle. So what that will mean, that if I now draw here Bz, in the y-axis I have Bz, delta Bz, yeah, and then if I try drawing my Bz with respect to distance, this is 0.1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I will find that my dz will do thing like this. At 3, it will be maximum, okay, and then it will again come back to something close to regional. Okay? So this is how. So you can see for gravity anomaly, yeah, when we considered it was a function of, for gravity anomaly, it was a function of, rho. It was a function of distance. I mean, the z was a function of x, yeah, and it was a function of r. R is the extent of the body. In here, for magnetic anomaly, it is a function of course, delta m. Delta m is nothing but the total the total magnetization of the body and the solid angle that it means. Okay, so that is how magnetic anomalies are thought about. Now, in Lowry's book, the magnetic anomalies, the expression for magnetic anomalies for a sphere, for a horizontal cylinder, for horizontal crustal block, and for for horizontal crustal block is actually given. Okay, sphere, horizontal cylinder, and horizontal crustal block is given. You don't have to remember the derivations, but it's important to remember it's important to go through the derivation once and understand how the derivations are done. It's easy, but you have to remember actually the final expression. Okay, so remember the final expression. Okay, because you often, for example, in your NET exam or in your GATE exam, you often find numericals with these formulas. Okay, so if you remember the formulas, okay, it will be fairly easy for you to actually substitute the parameters with the numbers given and to find out your magnetic anomaly. They actually ask you to calculate dz, okay, which will again be a function of a few different things, which is dependent on the geometry and the solid angle, most likely. I mean, in most of the cases. Okay, so remember the final expression on these different typical crustal ore bodies. The final thing that I want to discuss, and you can read, and in the, I will not upload a pre-recorded lecture tomorrow, simply because the thing that I want to discuss in the next class is teleomagnetism and continental drift and stuff. How those calculations are done. We have briefly touched upon them during our plate tectonics class, but then I think it's important that you are present while I teach, because there could be lots of questions, and it's important that we have an interactive session around them. Okay, so hence I will not upload a lecture, but we will talk about them in the um, in the um, in the live class. Okay, which will be on Monday. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is NRM, or natural remanent magnetization. Okay, what is natural remanent magnetization? Natural remanent magnetization refers to the untreated magnetization of a rock. What it means? I take out a sample from the field. Okay, say I take out the sample of basalt from the field, and then I measured its magnetization. Whatever magnetization I find, I call it as natural remanent magnetization because it is completely untreated in the laboratory. Now, natural remanent magnetization has two components. One is primary magnetization and the secondary magnetization. Primary magnetization and secondary magnetization is very similar. So NRM is very close, is what we talked as MT. Primary magnetization is MR and secondary magnetization is MI, induced magnetization. Okay. Now, primary magnetization MR is further subdivided into few categories. One would we call as thermoremanent magnetization. I'll just give you the definition and then you can read about them in detail in Lowry's book. They're very easy to read. Thermoremanent magnetization. Thermoremanent magnetization. And then we have something called sedimentary remanent magnetization. Remanent magnetization. And then the third one is called chemical remanent magnetization. Okay. Sedimentary remanent magnetization is often also called DRM or depositional remanent magnetization. Chemical remanent magnetization is called CRM, and thermal remanent magnetization is called TRM. Okay. Thermal remanent magnetization is nothing but when it is related to the igneous rocks. So what you know how igneous rocks are formed. So magma or lava actually gets cooled, gets chilled, and then an igneous rock forms. And while this thermal process goes on of chilling, okay, the magnetization that is acquired by the rock is called thermal remanent magnetization. Sedimentary remanent magnetization or DRM or depositional remanent magnetization is nothing but the remanent magnetization which is acquired by the rock while sedimentary deposition takes place. The rock actually deposits from a fluid, and while the deposition takes place, it acquires magnetization, and that is what we call is DRM or depositional remanent magnetization. There is also called something called PDRM, which we will discuss little bit on next class. Post depositional remanent magnetization. We will discuss that in the next class. PDRM. We will discuss that in the next class. And that is the DRM is related to the depositional remanent magnetization, is related to the sedimentary process. When sedimentary rocks form, the magnetization which is acquired is called sedimentary remanent magnetization. And chemical remanent magnetization is related to the most of the time it is related to the chemical changes that happens in a rock. For example, while metamorphism starts, okay, so a sedimentary rock gets converted to a metamorphic rock, or a igneous rock gets converted to a metamorphic rock. While that chemical change actually happens, it can also acquire the magnetization, and that is what we call as the chemical remanent magnetization. Okay, there are examples and stuff is given in Lowry's book. You can read them on your own. But we will discuss a little bit about the PDRM in the next class. Okay. So and of course we will talk about in detail about paleomagnetism and geomagnetism, rock magnetism, continental drift, everything in the next class as well. So I'm not uploading a lecture tomorrow because I want it to be live. And I will, let me see if you have any question that you have not understood. Anything quickly, guys? Nirul, was it clear for you? Everything that we have talked today?
Yes, sir, it was clear.
Okay, excellent. Sumit, was it clear? Sumit Kumar Meena. Yash, was it clear for you everything what we discussed today?
Yes, sir.
Okay, excellent. Then I will see you on Monday. Take care.